are preparing this podcast series as part of the Women in Social Peace project. The main aim of this series is to benefit and inspire women from the experiences and stories of women mediators and peace builders from Turkey and the world.
In this series, as Dilara Dilan Kaya and Tunç Karaçay, we came together with valuable women mediators and peace builders.
We will be pleased to bring their voices together with you.
Hi everyone, I am Dilara Gök.
Hi, I am Tunç Karaçay.
In today's program, our guest is Avila Kilmurray, who is the well-known peace activist and peace building and philanthropy expert from Northern Ireland. Welcome to the Women in Peace podcast, Avila.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Thank you for a nice introduction, Dilara, and welcome again, Avila. Before we start the program, I would like to briefly introduce you. It is not easy to introduce you in limited time, but we will try our best. Avila Kilmurray has been working in Northern Ireland since 1975, and she has particular interest in women's issues and anti-poverty work, and was a founder member of the Northern Ireland Women's Coalition and was a member of the coalition's negotiating team for the Good Friday Agreement. Additionally, Avila was a director of Community Foundation for Northern Ireland, which support for community action and peace building. Currently, Kilmurray is working as the Migration and Peace Building Executive at the Social Change Initiative, a role which supports work with the Migrant Learning Exchange Program and Learning on Peace Building. Finally, Avila is a visiting professor with the Transitional Justice Institute at Ulster University, and she is author of Community Action in a Contested Society, The Story of Northern Ireland. She is also board member of the International Fund for Ireland. Thank you for your coming again. In this point, maybe we can start with our questions. We try to make an introduction about you in this way.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Tunç. It's not easy to describe Avila's experience shortly, I know, but we just try as much as we can, Avila. Thank you again. Northern Ireland peace experience is really important for us who are seeking to find a way for peace in Turkey, And within this podcast, we mostly focus on the involvement and participation of women in this process and try to understand achievements, effects, as well as challenges. In this direction, today, we would like to hear from you more about the Women's Coalition experience, which worked directly in the negotiations of the Good Friday Agreement. And regarding this, our first question is about how was the establishment process of the coalition and then its role during the peace negotiations.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. Well, first of all, I think it's important to say that the Women's Coalition actually built on the involvement of women at different levels of society during our 30 years of violent conflict, which sort of came to, if not an end, to certainly sort of less with the ceasefires in 1994. But over the years of conflict, women had been active at local community level, particularly in deprived communities, communities that did not have resources, both in rural and in urban areas. But also women had been active in the trade union movement and indeed in lobbying for legislation change, because Northern Ireland is a very traditional society, quite heavily influenced by churches, a number of different churches. So women didn't have the sort of legislative protection that actually women in Britain and in other areas did have. So whenever we had the ceasefires and there was the suggestion that there would be peace negotiations, we were very keen to make sure that the sort of issues like protection of women from domestic violence, like divorce legislation, like sort of better conditions in housing and income generation, that they would be written into some of the negotiations. So as women activists, we actually wrote to all the established political parties and asked them. We had a list of a charter of demands, and we didn't hear back from any of them. They basically ignored us. So we decided that if they were going to ignore us, and that there would, from what looking at the representation, that there would be no women at the peace talks, we decided we would set up the coalition, partially just to make a statement. And we deliberately called it a coalition, not a party, because we basically said, look, we want to do politics differently. We're not another traditional party. We're broader than that. We're about bringing in women who have demands over and above the standard argument over the constitutional question, whether we should be part of the Republic of Ireland or whether we should stay part of the United Kingdom. And on top of that, we sort of said, we also want to make sure that there is a reflection in the coalition of women from different sides of our divided community. So we said we'll structure the coalition to reflect our divided society. So we had two leaders, one from the Catholic nationalist side, one from the Protestant unionist side. And we said, okay, the other thing that we need to do is not get caught up in detailed policy positions, because that tends to divide people. Instead, we will have three principles: the principles of human rights, of equality, and of inclusion. In other words, we will talk to everybody, no matter what the backgrounds were. And we had an electoral system put in place to ensure that the political parties related to the various paramilitary organizations would be at the table. So inclusion meant talking right across the board. But because we had that electoral system, we actually got elected. To be honest, much to our own surprise, because we set the coalition up with 6 weeks to go before the actual election. And what we did was we said, well, these traditional politicians, virtually all men, are telling us, oh, they'd love to put up women on as candidates, but they can never find them. So we said, okay, we will put an ad in the local evening paper and say, if you're a woman who's interested in politics, who wants to have a say in the peace process, who subscribes to our three principles of equality, human rights, and inclusion, get in touch with us. And within our 6 weeks, we got 90 women to stand as candidates. So even that was actually saying back to the traditional politics, what you're saying is a load of rubbish. Women are prepared to stand. So we got elected and entered into the peace negotiations. And the first challenge that we had was to abide by our principle of inclusion. Because just as the peace negotiations were starting, the ceasefire for the Irish Republican Army, the IRA, broke down. So Sinn Féin, who had been elected to the peace talks, were excluded from the peace talks. So we said, well, on our principle of inclusion, we're going to continue to talk to them. So we had back-channel discussions and filled them in as to what was happening. And similarly, later on, when two of the parties related to loyalist paramilitaries, the Protestant paramilitaries, were excluded because their ceasefire had broken down, we continued to meet with them. So again, we sort of deliberately looked to the implementation of our policy. And the second challenge we had to our principles was on human rights, because just after we were elected, the mother of a young girl who was being held on remand in prison in England on alleged charges of having planted a bomb came to us and said, my daughter's pregnant. She's been strip searched constantly. We want you to go over and meet her and make a statement. And generally, we would be in a situation where she was allegedly a Republican. So therefore, you would expect people from the loyalist side to be saying, oh, well, don't want to get involved. No smoke without fire. She might have been involved. But we said, no, let's go back to our principle of human rights. Irrespective of what side she's from, we need to respond to this. But what we did was we sent over one of our members, who was a woman medical doctor from the Protestant community. And she saw the girl, came out and said it was an abuse of human rights. So it was actually almost, taking people from either side to look at issues that would be seen as aligned. And that actually worked really well in terms of keeping to the principles. So that's really how we got going. In terms of your second question about the involvement of the peace talks lasted from 1996 up to 1998, and they were very acrimonious, and some parties, boycotted at different times, others came in. And the line that we took in the peace talks, which Senator George Mitchell, the US Senator who was chairing it, later said was actually very useful. So the second question you asked was about how we dealt with the negotiations. And I think one of the things that we had that benefited us, and indeed Senator George Mitchell, who was the US Senator who chaired the negotiations, acknowledged this, is that unlike most established politicians, we were prepared to ask questions and prepared to say at times that we didn't know the answers. Because most established politicians actually they never want it to appear in public that they don't know the answers. And when we were prepared to ask them, they listened as well. But the second thing was that what we found in the negotiations was that established politicians actually didn't listen often to what the nuances of what their opposing parties were saying. And they didn't pick up on it. Whereas we were able to go along and sort of say, well, you're saying that Sinn Féin or the official unionists said this. They did, but actually they also said that. So it was picking up on the nuance, and it's within those nuances that you get possible movement and some compromises. And then also, we also referred back to civil society, broader civil society. So when we were discussing human rights issues, we went to the NGOs that were active and had the detailed information about that. We said, well, draw us up the policy paper and we will insert it then into the negotiations, or indeed on the economy, or on community development, or on schooling. Similarly, we sort of said, look, we're going to draw in the expertise of broader civil society because that's where the expertise lies. And we were able through that to get some of those issues into the agreement. For example, except for the Women's Coalition, the issue of victims of violence would not have been in the agreement. And we also did work on the issue of release of political prisoners and talked to the groups that were involved in that. So it was basically going from a premise of the need to broaden democracy, because one of the first casualties of violent conflict is that broadening of people involved in the political process. It gets narrowed, and the oxygen is taken out of many of the issues that are important, the social and economic issues, and issues like women's rights.
Yes, thank you for these significant explanations about the coalition establishment process. Especially you talk about the challenges during this process. In this point, we want to continue another question related with this. Actually, regarding the women's coalition experience, how did the women who were politically different come together at that time? And how did they reach out to other women? And what was the strategy and motivation behind this?
Well, the fact that we had our three guiding principles of human rights, equality, and inclusion gave us a framework to reach out to women from across our different divides, across our sectarian divide or our political divide. Now, obviously, there was other women that supported the traditional parties. But we were able to mobilize sufficient women who said there are issues here over and above the constitutional issue that we actually feel very strongly about. And the other thing that actually brought women into us was the fact that there was no woman representation at the table beyond the Women's Coalition. Now, in doing that, we were also building on community-based action over 10, 20 years, where women had been brought together and had come together on issues like poverty, on issues about, where were they going, how to protect their children, how could they actually get jobs, whatever else. So we had experience of bringing women together on functional issues, if you like, and we continued that process but then recognize that those functional issues like poverty are actually political issues as well. And one of the things that I suppose was disappointing in some ways was the reaction of traditional parties was to immediately, despite the fact that they actually, didn't have women at the forefront of representation of those parties, but they used their women members to attack the coalition. And I suppose that was to be expected. However, one of the unforeseen results of the coalition was that it actually enabled women within the traditional political parties to argue internally that they should have more prominence in order to try and head off the support that the coalition was getting.
Thank you so much, Avila. When I'm listening to you, I'm just thinking that the representation issue for women is still maybe somewhat continue as a problem nowadays in the world, maybe. Regarding this, we wonder what kind of resistance you face from different parts of society, both during the foundation of the coalition process and also throughout the peace negotiation, especially from the elites and maybe patriarchy. Also, we are curious about your strategy to cope with this kind of resistance at that time.
Yes, well, there was resistance, obviously. I mean, we were told to go back and breed for Ulster, in other words, to have more children. We were told to get back to the kitchen, and the way we dealt with that actually was through humour. We actually one of our representatives, when she was told to go back to the kitchen, stood up and in the assembly and sang a verse of that song "Stand by Your Man." So we actually tried to. Our first election poster was a cartoon dinosaur. With the suffragette colours, green, white and violet, give women the vote, saying goodbye to dinosaurs. And the male politicians came on the TV and said, "Oh, we're very insulted. You're calling us a dinosaur." And I sort of said, "Well, do you see your name there? But if you want to self-identify as a dinosaur, please don't let me stand in your way." So to an extent, we used humour. We used to try and be different. And the more they attacked us as being outsiders, the more we were able to say, well, yes, we are outsiders. We're outsiders politically because men have dominated and put women on the sidelines. But also we're outsiders because you're the ones that have made the mess and actually haven't been able to come to any agreement over the last 30 years. So there's been benefit being an outsider. And because you can bring a different mindset, because, you're coming in sort of fresher than having been through stage after stage of unsuccessful negotiations. So, yeah, I mean, it's a matter of, of turning the insults and using that then to actually mobilize more. And the media picked up very often the sort of, the patriarchal insults or whatever else. And that actually just gave us more publicity. So the men didn't really think about the unforeseen consequences of attacking us in that way. If they had said nothing at all, it probably would have been worse because we wouldn't have got the sort of the publicity that we actually did.
We already have a chance to watch the small version of Wave Goodbye to Dinosaur documentary. And we wonder how this documentary affects society and how can you describe impact of it as a medium while peacebuilding activities continue?
Well, I think it was an important documentary because it did capture some of the learning and the experience of the Northern Ireland Women's Coalition. But to be honest, I think it has more of an impact on when it's shown in other societies in conflict rather necessarily than in Northern Ireland itself. Because Northern Ireland has sort of moved on a bit in terms of its politics. But I think where it is useful is that it shows what can be done in terms of, broadening the idea of politics, of actually ensuring representation of women's voice. And sometimes I think, when we have an opportunity like a peace process, we can overthink the problems about actually getting involved Whereas what that documentary showed was the importance of just grabbing the opportunity, and actually sort of bringing people together and saying, look, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. We would be mad not to at least try. There's no guarantee of success, but at least try. And also just recognizing that when you live in a situation, as we did, of prolonged violent conflict, it narrows democracy. It narrows politics to just the established parties and the traditional politicians and the people with money. And it's really important to broaden it, because otherwise it will be an elite agreement, peace agreement, which will exclude the everyday concerns of people, the people that were actually probably most impacted adversely by the conflict. So if nothing else, it wasn't about just giving women or a group of women the voice. It was trying to give women in that broader excluded communities a voice, and ensuring that some of their concerns were involved. And media is very important then in reflecting some of that learning. It doesn't always do it because media itself can sometimes be overly controlled. But where it is prepared to make the documentary, as people did with that, then I think it can be useful, not to be copied by other people, but at least perhaps to give a discussion starter for other people as to how best they can create change in their context.
By the way, Avila, do we have a chance to watch this documentary from Turkey? We couldn't find it. We really looked for it, but we couldn't find it. Maybe how can we reach it?
I haven't got it, but my friend Monica McWilliams, she has it, I think, on link. So I could ask her to send it to me, and I could send it on.
It would be really great. And please, so we can.
It's in it. Well, our link is in English. Actually, the Irish Embassy in Cyprus translated it, I'm nearly sure, into both Greek and Turkish.
Oh.
Because they showed it there, and we spoke in both parts of the island. So there may well even be a Turkish version knocking around somewhere.
Oh, it will be great.
But it was the Irish Embassy in Cyprus that did it.
Because we searched for it and we couldn't find any link regarding this. We just found a transcription of it, but not the whole documentary.
Yeah, well, I'll ask my friend to send me the link and I can send it on. And as I say, you can always try the Irish Embassy in Cyprus to see if they still have the Turkish version.
Great. So we can also share it to our networks as well, the other women networks. So it would be great. Thank you so much, Avila. And also thank you so much again to accepting our invitation today. Your experiences, observations really help us to explore how we can involve this process and how we can cope with these challenges. Actually, I had a chance to listen to you 2 years ago in DPI's meeting online, and today and today I feel inspired again, and always find something new to learn from your speech, from your experience. So thank you again, Avila.
So
okay, thank you all very much. All the best. Good luck.
Thank you.